You're standing in front of a 1920s bazaar building with your name about to go on the deed. Limestone facade. Original brass fixtures. Marble lobby that echoes when you walk. This isn't just real estate. This is architecture with a capital A. The building is on the National Register of Historic Places. Preservation societies want to photograph it. Your business card will say you're the steward of a piece of American history. When you renovate, your name goes on a bronze plaque next to the architect who designed it in 1923. You're not buying a building. You're buying legacy. City officials love you because you're preserving heritage. You qualify for tax credits that cover 20% to 45% of renovation costs, free money from the federal and state government for doing exactly what you wanted to do anyway. Wealthy tenants will pay premium rents to have offices in a landmark. Tourists take pictures in front of your building. Architectural tours stop and point. You own a piece of cultural infrastructure that cannot be replicated, cannot be torn down, and will exist long after you're gone. This is the dream that makes developers spend $18 million restoring a building worth $12 million on the open market. That's the vision that preservationist groups and historic tax credit consultants sell you. Here's what nobody mentions until you're 18 months into permitting hell. A historic landmark building is not a real estate investment. It's a regulated preservation project wrapped in development restrictions so severe that your ability to generate market rate returns is structurally constrained by federal preservation standards, local landmark commissions, and the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation that dictate everything from your window materials to your HVAC vent placement. The actual building, the limestone, the brass, the marble, those are cost centers that require specialized craftsmen charging $180 per hour to repair using historical methods. You don't own the building in any conventional sense. You own the right to maintain it according to rules set by the National Park Service, enforced by your state historic preservation office, and monitored by local landmark commissions that can reject your skylight proposal because it's incompatible with the period character. You think you're buying an asset. You're actually buying a responsibility with a financing structure attached. The economics only work if you can monetize tax credits, charge premium rents justified by historical cachet, and endure 24 to 48 months of additional permitting time compared to conventional development. Once you understand that, everything else makes sense. Let's start with the number that separates preservationists from developers. Acquiring and renovating a historic landmark building costs $5 million to $100 million depending on size, location, and condition. A 40,000 square foot historic office building in a secondary market runs $3 million to $8 million to acquire. In gateway cities, you're paying $15 million to $60 million for the same square footage because location premium compounds historical significance. But acquisition is just the beginning. Renovation costs for historic buildings run $250 to $600 per square foot compared to $120 to $200 for conventional renovation. Why? Because you cannot use standard materials or methods. You need craftsmen who know how to restore hand-carved limestone, repair original plaster using period-appropriate techniques, and rebuild wooden window frames to match 1920s profiles. A standard window replacement costs $800. A historically accurate wooden double-hung window restoration costs $4,500 to $8,500 per window. A 40,000 square foot building with 120 windows is $540,000 to $1,020,000 just for fenestration. Before we get to the revenue model, there's a cost almost nobody budgets for, the soft costs of compliance and permitting. Historic renovations require approval from multiple agencies. You need National Park Service certification to qualify for federal tax credits. You need State Historic Preservation Office review. You need local landmark commission approval for every exterior change. This process requires specialized consultants, historic preservation architects at $175 to $250 per hour, preservation tax credit consultants at $35,000 to $80,000 per project, and legal counsel familiar with Section 106 compliance. The permitting timeline for historic renovation runs 18 to 36 months longer than conventional projects. You're paying holding costs, property taxes, insurance, security, loan interest, on a non-income producing asset for 2 to 3 years before you can start construction. On a $12 million acquisition financed at 75% LTV at 7.5% interest, you're paying $67,500 monthly in debt service. Over 24 months of permitting delays, That's $1,620,000 in carrying costs before renovation begins. Then there's the renovation itself. Structural work to stabilize a 100-year-old building, $80 to $150 per square foot. Historically accurate exterior restoration, $120 to $280 per square foot. Interior build-out to modern commercial standards while maintaining character-defining features, $100 to $200 per square foot. MEP systems that must be concealed to avoid visual impact on historic fabric, add 25% to standard costs. For a 40,000 square foot building, total renovation costs run $10 million to $24 million. Add it up. Acquisition, $5 million to $12 million. Soft costs and holding period, $1.5 million to $3 million. Renovation, $10 million to $24 million. Contingency for unforeseen conditions, and there are always unforeseen conditions in century-old buildings, 15% to 20%. Total project cost, $18 million to $45 million for a 40,000 square foot building. That's $450 to $1,125 per square foot all in. You can build new construction for $280 to $450 per square foot. The premium you're paying is the historical designation itself. Most people who fail here don't fail for dramatic reasons. They fail because of 3 traps that preservation consultants downplay. The first trap is tax credit recapture risk. Federal historic tax credits cover 20% of qualified rehabilitation expenses. State credits add another 20% to 25% in many states. On a $15 million renovation, that's $3 million to $6.75 million in credits. Sounds incredible. Except these credits come with a 5-year compliance period. If you sell the building, change its use, or fail to maintain its historic character during those 5 years, you must repay a portion of the credits. Sell in year 2 and you repay 80% of the credits received. That's $2.4 million to $5.4 million due to the IRS. Developers who underestimate how long it takes to stabilize operations or face unexpected market downturns get trapped. They cannot sell without triggering recapture, but holding costs are destroying them. The second trap is scope expansion through discovery. You open a wall during renovation and discover the original decorative plaster is intact but damaged. Under preservation standards, you're now required to restore it, not replace it. What was budgeted as $12,000 for drywall becomes $85,000 for plaster restoration by specialists. You find original terrazzo flooring under carpet. Preservation standards require you to restore it. Add $120,000. Historic buildings hide expensive obligations. Developers budget 15% contingency. Actual overruns run 25% to 40% because every discovery triggers preservation requirements that exceed modern construction costs. The third trap is rental rate reality versus premium assumption. You assume tenants will pay 15% to 25% premium rents for the privilege of occupying a landmark building. In trophy markets like San Francisco or Boston, this holds. In secondary markets, it doesn't. Tenants care about parking, highway access, and fiber internet, not whether your building is on the National Register. You've spent $1,125 per square foot to deliver space you can only lease for the same $28 per square foot as conventional buildings. Your pro forma assumed $35 per square foot justified by historical cachet. At $28 per square foot, your project IRR drops from 12% to 4.8%. The building is beautiful. The returns are catastrophic. Here's the part that changes how you see this entire business. Historic landmark buildings make money through a combination of rental income, tax credit monetization, and long-term appreciation justified by irreplaceability. The core economics start with rental income. A 40,000 square foot building leased at $32 per square foot generates $1,280,000 in gross annual rent. After operating expenses, property management, utilities, maintenance, property taxes, insurance, running 40% to 55% of gross rent, you net $576,000 to $768,000 in NOI. Now add tax credit monetization. On a $15 million qualified rehabilitation, you receive $3 million in federal historic tax credits and potentially $3 million in state credits. Total, $6 million. But you cannot use these credits unless you have tax liability. Most developers sell the credits to investors at 85 cents to 95 cents on the dollar. You receive $5.1 million to $5.7 million in cash from tax credit investors. This capital reduces your equity requirement or pays down debt. Here's the math. Total project cost, $22 million, $7 million acquisition, $15 million renovation. Tax credit proceeds, $5.5 million. Net capital required, $16.5 million. If you finance 70%, $11.55 million at 7% interest, your debt service is $923,000 annually. NOI of $672,000 cannot cover debt service. You're losing $251,000 per year. Now we get to the number that actually determines everything: exit value and appreciation. Historic landmarks in strong markets appreciate 3% to 6% annually because supply is fixed. They're not making more 1920s Beaux-Arts buildings. After holding for 7 years, your building worth $22 million at completion is worth $27 million to $31 million. You sell for $29 million. After paying off debt, $11.55 million minus 7 years of minimal principal paydown equals $10.8 million remaining. You net $18.2 million. Against your initial equity of $4.95 million, $16.5 million minus $11.55 million debt, that's a 3.67x equity multiple over 7 years, or roughly 19% IRR. But this assumes everything goes perfectly. Assumes you lease at pro forma rates, hold for 7 years without refinancing pressure, and sell into a strong market. These numbers are based on industry averages and should be treated as a framework for thinking, not a guarantee of any particular outcome. The model only works if you can endure negative cash flow during the hold period and exit successfully. Let's talk about the Packard plant in Detroit. The Packard Automotive Plant is a 3.5 million square foot historic industrial complex that has been abandoned since 1958. Multiple developers have attempted to restore portions of it. Every single one has failed. Art Express attempted a $350 million redevelopment in 2017. The project collapsed within 2 years. Why? The scope was impossibly large, the neighborhood lacked tenant demand to justify market rents, and historic preservation requirements made renovation costs exceed $120 per square foot for industrial space that could only lease for $8 to $12 per square foot. This is not a story about bad luck. This is a story about economics that never worked. Historic designation without market fundamentals is a financial death sentence. Now take the Wythe Hotel in Brooklyn. Developers Andrew Tarlow and Partners acquired a 1901 Cooperage building in Williamsburg for $3.2 million in 2010. They spent $16 million converting it into a 70-room boutique hotel. They qualified for 20% federal and 20% state historic tax credits on the $16 million renovation, $6.4 million in credits monetized at $5.8 million. This reduced their total project cost from $19.2 million to $13.4 million. The Wythe Hotel became a cultural phenomenon. Room rates hit $350 to $500. The rooftop bar generates $2 million annually. In 2018, the property was reportedly valued at over $70 million. They succeeded because they entered Williamsburg as it was gentrifying, delivered a product the market wanted, and used tax credits to reduce basis enough to generate outsized returns. Historic preservation was the financing tool, not the product. Here's what the smartest operators in this industry do differently. They don't just lease space. They monetize the historical designation itself. First, event and filming revenue. Historic buildings are in constant demand for film and TV productions, corporate events, weddings, and fashion shoots. A landmark building can charge $8,000 to $35,000 per day for location shoots. Host 20 events annually and you generate $160,000 to $700,000 in high-margin revenue. The building exists whether you monetize it or not. Second, facade easement donations. You can donate a preservation easement to a qualified conservation organization, permanently restricting future alterations to the building's exterior. This donation is tax-deductible at fair market value of the easement, often 10% to 15% of building value. On a $20 million building, that's a $2 million to $3 million charitable deduction generating $740,000 to $1,110,000 in tax savings at a 37% marginal rate. Third, naming rights and sponsorships. Corporate sponsors pay $100,000 to $500,000 annually to have their name associated with landmark preservation projects, especially if the building hosts public events or tours. This works best for highly visible properties. Fourth, historic tax credit syndication premiums. Instead of selling credits at 90 cents on the dollar, sophisticated developers structure deals where they retain partial ownership and share appreciation with tax credit investors. This can increase effective credit value to 95 cents to $1 and 2 cents per dollar. Here is the honest math, not the pitch deck version, the real version. Good year scenario. Your 40,000 square foot landmark building in a strong secondary market achieves 95% occupancy at $34 per square foot. Gross rent, $1,292,800. Operating expenses at 42%, $543,000. NOI, $749,800. Debt service on $11 million at 7%, $879,000. You're losing $129,200 annually, but appreciation at 5% adds $1,100,000 in value. Your equity position grows by $970,800 this year through appreciation. After 7 years, you sell for $30.8 million, pay off $10.2 million in remaining debt, and net $20.6 million against $5.5 million in initial equity. That's a 3.75x multiple and 21% IRR. Bad year scenario. Market softens. You achieve only 78% occupancy at $29 per square foot. Gross rent, $905,600. Operating expenses, $380,000, higher percentage due to fixed costs. NOI, $525,600. Debt service, $879,000. You're losing $353,400 annually. Appreciation slows to 2%. After 7 years, building value is $25.3 million. After paying off debt, $10.2 million, you net $15.1 million against $5.5 million equity. That's a 2.75x multiple and 15% IRR, acceptable but not spectacular given the risk and complexity. Stay with this because the final calculation changes everything. The gap between these scenarios is driven by occupancy rate and market rent growth, factors you cannot control. Historic buildings in declining neighborhoods become beautiful albatrosses. The preservation restrictions that make them valuable in strong markets make them impossible to reposition in weak ones. The person who wins in this business is not a preservation romantic or an architecture enthusiast. The person who wins is a patient capital real estate investor who enters gentrifying neighborhoods 3 to 5 years before the market peak, uses historic tax credits to reduce basis by 25% to 35%. And exits before the next recession reveals that historical cachet does not support premium rents during downturns. They have relationships with tax credit syndicators and can close credit sales at 92 cents to 98 cents on the dollar. They understand that the building is a vehicle for credit monetization and appreciation, not a cash-flowing asset. They're comfortable with negative cash flow for 5 to 7 years because they're playing an equity appreciation game. Here's the counterintuitive truth: the best historic building owners are not the ones who love history most. They're the ones who understand that preservation is a financing strategy that works only in markets with strong underlying fundamentals. History is the product. Location is the business model. Confuse those two and you own a beautiful building nobody wants to lease. So let's go back to that 1920s Beaux-Arts building with the limestone facade and marble lobby. Your name is still going on the plaque. The Preservation Society still want to photograph it. But now you see it clearly. That bronze plaque isn't legacy, it's a legal obligation to maintain the building according to federal standards for at least 5 years or repay millions in tax credits. That marble lobby isn't an asset, it's a $340,000 restoration cost because you cannot replace it with modern materials. The architectural tours that stop and point aren't bringing you tenants, they're proving the building's cultural value while your debt service exceeds your NOI by $250,000 annually. The romantic version was about stewardship and legacy. The real version is understanding that historic landmark buildings are tax credit arbitrage plays in gentrifying neighborhoods where patient capital can endure years of negative cash flow while waiting for appreciation to justify the complexity. You can make exceptional returns if you buy right, execute efficiently, and sell into strength. But the fantasy version, the noble preservation of cultural heritage that also generates stable cash flow, that's structurally impossible. What's real is this: you're betting $18 million that the neighborhood gentrifies faster than your building deteriorates. And the only way that bet pays off is if you remember you bought a financing structure that happens to look like a piece of history, not the other way around.